This is the BBC. For details of our complete range of programmes, go to bbcworldservice.com/podcasts.
Welcome to the latest global news compiled in the early hours of Friday, the 21st of October. I'm Oliver Conway with a selection of highlights from across the BBC World Service. Coming up, another woman comes forward to accuse Donald Trump of groping.
Mr. Trump, I can assure you that I remember you and what you did to me as though it was yesterday.
The Trump campaign said it rejected smears. The businessman himself has said he may legally challenge the US election result if he considers it questionable. We'll hear from a voter focus group.
For undecided people, if you lean towards Trump, turn your dial to 1. If you lean towards Clinton, turn your dial to 3. Only if you hate them all and you will not vote for them should you stay in the center.
Also in this podcast.
Some media described her first meeting as entering the lion's den. It's more like a nest of doves.
So how did EU leaders greet the British Prime Minister at her first post-Brexit meeting? As Facebook rolls out a new feature, we ask, is the social media giant exerting too much influence over the way we talk to each other? And later.
Kumbuka was somewhat distracted by all the treats that he could find. He particularly made for some blackcurrant squash and drank about 5 litres of blackcurrant squash.
The drink of choice for a gorilla on the loose at London Zoo. More on that later. But first, the Republican presidential contender Donald Trump drew a lot of criticism in the US for refusing to say during the final presidential debate on Wednesday that he would accept the result of the election. He made light of that in a speech at a rally in Ohio on Thursday, where he said he would accept the election results if he won. But he went on to clarify his position.
Of course, I would accept a clear election result, but I would also reserve my right to contest or file a legal challenge in the case of a questionable result. Right?
Our North America editor John Sopel considers Mr. Trump's worries that the vote might be rigged.
Less than a month ago, when the first presidential debate was held, Donald Trump said he'd fully support Hillary Clinton if she were elected president. Last night, he wouldn't give that assurance. So what's changed? The crude answer is that he's had an awful few weeks and his position in the polls has deteriorated. So some analysts believe that his rigged election claims are no more than preparing the narrative for defeat. But what's his evidence? He complains of media bias, but he's not the first politician to do that. And he used to boast during the primary campaign of what a great relationship he had with the media and how they'd given him hundreds of millions of dollars worth of free advertising. His substantive claim is this.
If you look at your voter rolls, you will see millions of people that are registered to vote that shouldn't be registered to vote.
There is an investigation going on into this in Indiana, but no conclusion's been reached, and there's a lot of hearsay evidence of sharp practice in voter registration. In Philadelphia's 59 electoral divisions at the last election, not one vote was cast for the Republican candidate Mitt Romney, which is astonishing. But one reputable independent study found that over the past 10 years, out of 1 billion votes cast, there were only 31 found cases of voter impersonation. A very tiny fraction.
During the debate on Wednesday night, Mr. Trump responded to allegations of sexual misconduct made against him, saying they were totally false and that nobody has more respect for women than I do. However, on Thursday in New York, a 10th accuser went public. Karina Virginia, a yoga instructor and life coach, claimed she was groped by Mr. Trump as she was leaving the US Open tennis tournament in New York in 1998.
I was waiting for a car to arrive to take me home. As I was waiting, Donald Trump approached me. He was with a few other men. I was quite surprised when I overheard him talking to the other men about me. He said, "Hey, look at this one. We haven't seen her before. Look at those legs." As though I was an object rather than a person. He then walked up to me and reached his right arm and grabbed my right arm. Then his hand touched the right inside of my breast. "Don't you know who I am?" That's what he said to me. I felt intimidated and I felt powerless. I had come to the realization that I was the victim, and he had violated me when he groped me years earlier. I now understand that I was not to blame. Mr. Trump, perhaps you do not remember me or what you did to me so many years ago. But I can assure you that I remember you and what you did to me as though it was yesterday.
Karina, Virginia. Mr. Trump's campaign dismissed the accusation, saying it was part of a coordinated publicity-seeking attack with the Clinton campaign, which will stop at nothing to smear him. The US election may be fascinating for us outsiders, but many Americans have been declaring themselves deeply depressed. Still, tens of millions tuned in on Wednesday night to see the final televised debate between the two least popular presidential candidates in recent American history. Our correspondent James Cook joined a focus group in Las Vegas to hear the views of voters less than 3 weeks before the poll.
For undecided people, if you lean towards Trump, turn your dial to 1. If you lean towards Clinton, turn your dial to 3. Only if you hate them all and you will not vote for them should you stay in the center.
They call it dialing the debate. In a nightclub in Las Vegas, some 24 floating voters are twiddling their fingers, using little handheld devices to react to every sigh and every lie in real time.
Who says Hillary's opening was better? Raise your hands. Who says Trump's opening was better?
How they feel is fed back to TV screens and poured over by a team of pollsters. A red line shows the mood of those leaning to Donald Trump. Green is for Hillary Clinton, undecideds are yellow.
Does everyone have the correct number in your dial?
So what difference, if any, did the debate make?
Did it move any of you today? Did any of you move your vote today? How did you move?
I went from Trump to Clinton because Clinton proved to be more of an adult. Trump is more of the spoiled child. Clinton was more of the adult. She went toe-to-toe, head-to-head. She did just as well, but actually I think she did better than Trump.
Who else moved? How'd you move?
I'm more entrenched Hillary. I thought she was solid. She held her own. She was presidential. And Trump, while I think he actually did pretty good in the debate, all in all, he just doesn't have it.
How'd you move?
From undecisive to Trump.
Tell me why.
Because it seems like Trump really has the issues, and he's right. She's been in office, with Obama, they've been there long enough, and not enough has gotten better over that period of time. So in essence, he's saying you didn't do anything. So I'll give a guy a shot that's going to do something.
What I'm saying is that I will tell you at the time. I'll keep you in suspense.
Well,
okay?
Chris.
But what of the most controversial moment when Donald Trump suggested, yet again, that the poll would be rigged?
I want to ask you here on the stage tonight, do you make the same commitment that you will absolutely, sir, that you will absolutely accept the result of this election?
I will look at it at the time. I'm not looking at anything now. I'll look at it at the time.
How many of you had a problem with Donald Trump saying that he would not affirm the election results? Raise your hands.
Almost every hand went up.
What's the issue? Why do you have a problem?
I think because our country is built on a fair election, and when the results come in, yes, there can be evidence of voter fraud sometimes, but we have to trust that it's working the way it should, and the results stand.
Why did what Trump said bother you?
Because it'll inspire disconnection from a lot of the population from the political process.
How many of you, hold on,
There's going to be a surprise.
I'm already losing control of my focus group. How many of you wish that there were two other candidates, that you would replace both of them? Raise your hands.
Again, the hands shot up. The pollster running this focus group, Frank Luntz, is a horrified Republican who says both candidates are limping to the finish line.
If the rest of the world wanted to see America humbled, they got their wish.
What's your feeling about the mood of the American electorate 3 weeks out, as evidenced by what we saw here tonight?
The final stretch is usually a sprint, as the candidates bring thousands of people together and celebrate the electoral process. This is no sprint. They're limping to the finish line. A broken system, broken candidates, and an electorate that is afraid, deeply afraid of the future.
After the final debate, this focus group, one small slice of the American electorate, remains pretty evenly split between Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton. But most of them say they are united on one thing. They don't like either of them. For millions of Americans, this has been a depressing and destructive election.
James Cook in Las Vegas. Theresa May is briefing other European leaders about Britain's plans to leave the EU at her first Brussels summit as UK Prime Minister. The French President François Hollande has warned her not to expect any favours during Brexit negotiations. But the chairman of the summit, Donald Tusk, insisted everyone would remain cordial.
Some media described her first meeting in the European Council as entering the lion's den. It's not true. It's more like a nest of doves. And you can be sure she will be absolutely safe with us. And I hope that she will also realize that the EU is still the best company in the world.
With her thoughts on the challenges ahead, here's our Europe editor, Katja Adler.
At EU summits past, Europe's leaders accepted, with an eye roll or two, that British prime ministers would inevitably adopt Brussels sceptic tones for the UK press. While behind closed doors, they played a constructive EU role. But now the UK has voted to leave, Europe's skin is far thinner. Off the record, EU politicians express frustration, even bitterness, at what they perceive as Prime Minister May, and especially her predecessor David Cameron, playing Russian roulette with the EU and the UK's future, essentially for internal party politics. Attitudes across the EU are hardening, even in UK-friendly Germany. Leading Brexiteers like to boast that Europe's most powerful country is bound to push for a good EU trade deal for the UK. 1 in 5 German cars is sold in Britain, after all. But that confidence is misplaced. Germany treasures its European credentials as a way of leaving its wartime past behind. When it comes down to it in Berlin, EU politics will trump UK economics. The leaders of Germany, France and what had been one of Britain's best EU buddies, the Netherlands, all face elections next year. They're particularly jumpy, with Brexit fast becoming something of a political football across Europe.
Katja Adler in Brussels. Facebook Messenger is currently piloting a new feature offering suggestions for what to talk about with friends. Called Conversation Topics, it uses information shared on Facebook to prompt you to ask about your friend's holiday or night out. Dan Damon has been finding out more from Rhiannon Williams, technology correspondent for the iNewspaper.
At the moment, it's just a sort of beta test, meaning a sort of small selection of Facebook Messenger users in the UK and the US seem to be able to actually see the conversation topics. It hasn't been more widely rolled out yet, but it's likely that Facebook will introduce it as a fully fledged feature in the next few weeks.
Have they said how it works? You know, is there somebody in a call centre somewhere listening or monitoring your conversations and butting in?
Well, it appears to draw on the information that you choose to share with Facebook. So depending on your privacy settings, it'll be able to suggest to people that have opted into the feature as well, oh, so-and-so has been to Trafalgar Square today, why don't you start a conversation with them about that? Or you've just listened to this song, would you like to talk to somebody about that?
And I was reading that the new Google phone, the way that its assistant works is if you arrive at a location, it'll say, are you at so-and-so, and then make suggestions as to what you might do when you're there.
The Google Assistant can draw information from the sort of spoken word commands you give it. So if you say to it, I'm in London, what's good to do? Depending on whether you've got your settings switched on to allow it to draw location data, theoretically it could suggest the same sort of things, but it's, I guess Facebook are aiming to promote conversations between people you already know and friends, so it's slightly different in that sense.
The fear, I suppose, Rhiannon, is that they know where you are, but they do that anyway, don't they?
Facebook has an enormous amount of information that we actively opt into choosing and sharing with it. It's quite surprising how much information you can find out about people, even with particularly high privacy settings. So this probably is something which will be quite a concern to some people actively at the same time. The people that you choose to connect with on Facebook aren't always incredibly close friends, so a lot of people might be slightly annoyed at these prompts being sent out for people to hold conversations with them that are slightly unwarranted.
Is there any way that you can have a smartphone and stay hidden?
There are ways. You can go into settings and choose not to share any location data at any point. You can choose not to use maps or for that case, email addresses or certain messaging apps as well, which draw on the internet. But it's quite difficult to use what you call a smartphone in this day and age without transmitting some data. If you're absolutely confident that you don't want to share any kind of location data like that, you might be better off with an older phone with no internet access, which is now called a feature phone.
And is there part of this that they will bombard you with adverts? If you're talking about cars, are they going to send you an ad for a car?
That is a mild concern. Facebook has made it very clear that it thinks that holding conversations with bots is the future. Earlier this year, they announced about how soon you'll be able to order taxis or even pizzas and all kinds of different shopping functionalities through just having a quick chat with a bot via Facebook Messenger. So extra adverts is a concern and something I imagine a lot of people won't be very pleased with.
British technology journalist Rhiannon Williams. This is Global News, the best stories, interviews and on-the-spot reporting from the BBC World Service. If you miss any of the week's events, you can catch up with The World This Week, broadcast on Saturdays and Sundays, and also available to download from our website. The violence that followed the 2007 election in Kenya left more than 1,000 people dead and tens of thousands displaced. Nearly a decade later, many of those affected by the unrest have not received the help they were promised. And one group of victims has been camping outside the Kenyan parliament to make their voices heard. So who are they and what do they want? James Copnell is our Africa editor.
Well, there are more than 300 of them, and these are part of a group of people who fled into Uganda as refugees when that violence was really intolerable for them in Kenya after those elections in 2007. They came back a couple of years ago, and they say they were promised land and something around $4,000 per person to help them get back into normal life in Kenya. They have received some money, they say, but none of the rest of it, and people are getting pretty bitter at what they see as failed promises, including by the head of state.
Our president told us to come back, that he will look after us as he looked after others, victims, that he will pay us money. But when we came back, we didn't see anything, but we are suffering now. From that time, it is going about 2 years. We are suffering.
Strong words. What's been the reaction from the government?
Well, the main thing is that the government hasn't met these people who've been there for 17 days now outside Parliament. There's some suspicion, I think, that some of these people could be false claimants trying to get money when they haven't actually suffered. But Kenyan activists are pretty upset about that. One of them, Boniface Mwangi, with others, actually went and delivered food to these people, food and drink and so on. And it's Mashujaa Day in Kenya, which is Heroes Day. And the idea really was to say these are some of our heroes. They've suffered from the violence, and now their government isn't listening to them. And their call, at least, is for the Kenyan government to take care of these people who they say have suffered an awful lot.
And it can't look good for the government with these people sat on their doorstep.
No, and the images are pretty depressing, really. These people in quite difficult situations. Apparently there's been a baby born outside the parliament. And headline in one Kenyan media story about this was, "Our votes were tickets to hell."
James Copnell there. Today, the people of Wales will be marking the 50th anniversary of the Aberfan disaster, when a mountain of coal waste, which towered over the mining village, collapsed on a school. 116 children and 28 adults died. Campaigners said the authorities had been warned the tip was dangerous and the disaster should have been prevented. In the 1960s, South Wales was dotted with similar coal tips, the legacy of the area's mining heritage. The BBC's John Humphreys reported on the disaster at the time, and he returned half a century on.
They'll be singing this hymn in Aberfan today, a hymn written specially for the anniversary by a Methodist minister from a neighbouring valley. The people here need no reminding of what happened, but they want this of all anniversaries, to bear witness to what happened half a century ago.
I had just gone out for my milk and on the doorstep, and I lived right by the school. We heard this terrible roar, like a jet, and everything started to shake, so we ran out the back, and all we could see was a terrible cloud of black dust, and then absolute stillness. I've never known such a horrible stillness in all my life.
I was here within hours of the tip sliding. The miners who had just gone on shift at the local colliery had raced back to the surface, and I watched them desperately digging through the waste for their own children. Their faces, still black from the coal dust, were streaked with sweat and tears.
The mountain is still on the move, and as fast as you shift one
a piece of rock, you've got another part of the mountain coming down, and quite obviously you've got to protect the lives of the people that they're helping.
They dared not use heavy machinery, so they used shovels and picks. Someone would scream for silence. He'd heard the sound of a child crying out, and some were saved, but only some.
I'm sorry to say there's still about 110 or 115 or even a few more who still have to be got out.
In fact, it was 116 children, and they are buried here in this memorial cemetery on the hill above the village. Jeff Edwards can see this hillside from his house below. He was a child in that school 50 years ago. He remembers hearing the roar of the sliding tip, and then everything went black.
And then I woke up with all this material above me. The roof of the classroom had collapsed, and all the desks from the other side of the classroom had washed over in a wave to where I was sitting, and I was just buried under all the debris. I could see the coal dust really glistening in the light that was coming in. But to the left of my shoulder was a dead girl, and I couldn't get away from this dead girl. She was only a couple of inches away from me, and I couldn't get out because the desk was against my stomach, and that's all I could hear was screams and shouts, and those screams and shouts got less and less as time went by, because the majority of children in the class died either of the physical injuries or as a result of asphyxiation.
Beth fi wedi ysgrifennu ar y blodau yw dal I gofio. Bod ni'n dal I gofio. Mae'n bwysig bod chi'n ifanc I gofio hyn.
The ruins of the school have long since been replaced with a memorial garden, low stone walls where the classroom walls once stood. Even the children who still come here in little school groups from all over Wales seem to understand the scale of what happened. A new generation of children have a new school. It was opened by the Queen 4 years ago, and a new head teacher, Simone Rogan.
Every year we mark the disasters date with a special assembly and a prayer. But this year, clearly, with the 50th anniversary, there's a lot more happening in our school. But it is a very, very difficult subject to discuss with children, because ultimately we're talking about 116 children that were buried alive, children of similar age to our children at Ynysowen.
We know that the mountain slid and it buried the school and lots of children and adults, and only some people escaped from the toilet window. My nan's auntie's daughter died, and I think her name was Yvonne. I think she was about 7.
Is her mum still alive?
She's quite old now, but she still remembers when the day, because it was really sad. My great-grandpa was helping dig out all the people, but now he's passed away.
Did he used to talk about it?
Yeah, he always used to tell me it was him and his 2 other friends, and they digged one person out, and then he helped other people.
50 years on, this is probably the first generation of Aberfan children who are not growing up in the shadow of grief. They lead normal lives. It was not like that for Jeff Edwards and the other survivors.
We had no children to play with. All our friends had gone, and it was very difficult for us, really. And to a certain extent, parents who had lost children didn't want to see children playing in the streets, so we tended to go up into the plantation or down by the river, out of the way, because it upset parents who had lost children.
Jeff Edwards talking to John Humphreys. Here's a sound that TV viewers in Tunisia won't be hearing for a while. That is the theme tune of a popular Tunisian show that's been taken off air after a public outcry. The programme's host suggested that a young rape victim who was a guest on the show should marry one of her attackers. BBC Monitoring's Middle East specialist Alma Hassoun takes up the story.
So Hajar is 8 months pregnant, and she and her brother approached a TV program because it's known for dealing with social problems. Hajar said that she had been sexually abused since she was 14 years old by 3 of her relatives, including the brother of her stepmother. So the Tunisian TV presenter, during the show, he urged her to marry the father of the baby.
And this caused outrage in Tunisia?
Yes, indeed. I will give you examples from what I've seen on Facebook, for example. There is a campaign on a French language Facebook page that is called "Marry your rapist," he says. "We will see you in court," we reply.
And the TV authority have taken action against the programme?
Yes, yesterday the Haika, this is the name of the Tunisian communication body, they suspended the program. Actually, they suspended it for several reasons, not only one. First of all, they said that the girl was identifiable, although her face was blurred on the camera. And also, they said that the show put the girl on trial and presented her as guilty rather than a victim.
And has the show responded in any way, or the presenter?
Ala al-Shabi, who's the presenter, talked to a local Tunisian radio station, and he said that his words were taken out of context. Actually, for him, the problem is that the girl remained silent. He said, "This is the case of many Tunisian girls who have been raped and didn't say anything. Silence is the core of the case."
So he was saying that because she stayed silent, she should marry the father of the baby?
Yes, as the Haika, the communication body statement, said, it was kind of offensive because he was kind of accusing her of not having a proof of being raped. For example, he was saying, "Excuse me, I understand that she feared the first man. What about the second? What about the third?"
Are these attitudes shown by the presenter common in Tunisia?
Well, Tunisia is seen as one of the most progressed countries in Arab world when it comes to women's rights. However, we have this problem here because it's a rural area. So rape and, in general, sex out of marriage is kind of stigmatized, let alone having a child and being pregnant out of marriage.
Alma Hassoun from BBC Monitoring. A week ago, a giant silverback gorilla escaped from his enclosure at London Zoo. Newspaper headlines said Kumbuka had smashed through windows and was on the loose. But the zoo has now released a report which says it wasn't quite like that. Zoological Director Professor David Field told Eddie Mair exactly what happened.
Our keepers were going through their normal routines, bringing the gorillas in to their night quarters to give them their supper. And during that procedure, one of our keepers had unfortunately left one of the night den doors open, and as he was feeding the female gorillas, he noticed that Kumbuka, our male gorilla, had potted out of his enclosures and was standing in the keeper's corridor next to him.
Interesting use of the word potter. It flies in the face of all the headlines about gorilla on the rampage.
Absolutely. It's important to actually get that message across because Kumbuka is a remarkable animal, but in those circumstances he was just very calm, very normal, and he just potted out, literally just to explore his environment. And the keeper reacted in a professional, highly trained manner. His animal sense really kicked in, and he just talked to Kumbuka and just carried on as normal in many respects, just talking to him, reassuring him. Kumbuka was perfectly calm, and that gave the opportunity for the keeper just to back out behind a security door.
So tell me a little more about what Kumbuka did on his little adventure.
Well, once the keeper had actually put himself into a safe place, Kumbuka continued to explore the environment, as you would expect, but he also knew that the food storage dens were next to his dens. And so he ventured into that area to explore what treats or what extra food he could actually find. So whilst he was in that area, the keeper then tried to go around to make the environment secure. But Kumbuka was somewhat distracted by all the treats that he could find. He particularly made for some blackcurrant squash and drank about 5 litres of blackcurrant squash, although he was dripping quite a lot of it on the floor as he was doing so. But he certainly he drank some of the squash and he enjoyed it.
What effect does 5 litres of undiluted blackcurrant squash have on a gorilla?
Well, he's a big lad. 29 stone of gorilla, he can cope with 5 litres of undiluted squash. He was absolutely fine, and he's been fine ever since.
And he didn't find any Cadbury's chocolate?
No, unfortunately we don't let them have Cadbury's chocolate.
Cadbury's the leading chocolate manufacturer here in the UK. That was Professor David Field of London Zoo. And that's it from this edition of the Global News Podcast. An updated version will be available to download later. I'm Oliver Conway. Until next time, goodbye.